Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you? I'm no one. There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
May the Force be with us.
My nerd world.
Just let it in.
Ojaba. Why does she get a blaster and I don't? Ojaba.
Welcome to My Nerd World and the Star Wars podcast. I'm your host, Jon Justice. This week's episode is called Always in Motion is the Future. And I'm going to start sticking with theming of the podcast based off the title of the podcast when we intro the show. This is just more housekeeping than anything else. But rather than going with this is episode number 111, but really it's the title of the show this week that's most important. Always in Motion is the Future, because we have a ton of news to talk about this week about the future of the Star Wars genre. I had an email that came in a couple of weeks back, and someone had made a comment that, you know, Star Wars was a genre now. It's not a series of movies. It's its own thing, and it probably has been for a long time. But we got some major news this week about new movies being made, despite some unnecessary and ridiculous controversy around those new movies, of which I'm only going to spend a nanosecond of time on, because I don't want to get all annoyed again. But it is worth mentioning, so we will talk about it. J.J. Abrams commented on Episode 9. No details, but basically was asked about Episode 9. We'll get into that. We'll talk a bit about the new Star Wars. And another reason why I believe that we do have any of the controversy that we have. One of the reasons why. If you are knee-deep into the fandom and you pay attention to social networking, and I've mentioned this before and I'll mention it again. If you don't, then congratulations, man. I'm envious of you, but I am. I mean, I'm in on Twitter. I'm in on Facebook. I'm in on Reddit, and I see the nonsense that gets thrown around. And I think part of the reason is that Star Wars is changing, and this is a new Star Wars now, not just with the movies themselves being new, but this is a new realm for Star Wars of not waiting around for content. We're going to get a lot of content, and I think for a lot of people, Star Wars, including myself, was a lot of waiting and the anticipation. And with social networking and the ability for all of us to communicate easily with one another and to get our opinions out there, a lot of times cowardly and anonymously, this added a new dynamic that has caused a lot of controversies and tensions. But this is a new reality now. There is no longer a waiting game when it comes to Star Wars. So we'll talk about that. We'll also get into a bit of a Star Wars story. I heard another podcast mention what their feelings were. I think it was on Rebel Force Radio, actually. But what their feelings were about what they saw in the trailers, in the teasers that were released. And they picked up on something rather interesting. And once I kind of heard that line of thinking, it made a difference in what I was watching. And so I'm being vague. I'll get to it when I get to that part of the show. Also, time permitting, I heard on the Steel Wars podcast, he had an interview with this guy called the Suck Lord. Actually, I read an article about this dude in Geek Magazine back in like 2012. Big foul-mouthed Star Wars fan who makes like bootleg Star Wars toys. But he made a really interesting comment, and I'll share it with you now, and then time permitting at the end of the show this week we'll talk more about it. But he says, I don't need to have Star Wars feel like it did when I was, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, right? I need Star Wars to feel like Star Wars at For me, age 45. And that's really relevant to the other discussion of the new Star Wars that we're currently experiencing. A Star Wars that will still be here long after a lot of us are dead and gone. I don't need Star Wars to feel like it did when I was a kid. I think a lot of people need to come to grips with that. We need to have Star Wars feel like it does now. That's a healthier way. Look, I have toys. I'm surrounded by toys in my office right now. And look, a lot of these toys, especially my old vintage toys, are there to evoke those feelings, to evoke those emotions, to remind me of when I was a kid. And in no small part to feed that part of me that stopped aging. Because mentally, in a lot of ways, we do stop aging. I don't think of myself as a 45-year-old man. You know, a lot of times I think of myself as a 16, 17-year-old. I mean, mentally, when it comes to things, and especially things that I enjoy in pop culture items and stuff like that. Doesn't mean that I'm immature and I'm acting out like that. It just means on a mental basis, we kind of stop. You know, that image we have of ourselves. If we ended up getting sucked into the Matrix, it would be really, really interesting to see what vision, what version of ourselves we ended up creating the way that Neo did. But this is a Star Wars podcast and not a not a Matrix podcast. Although I am the one guy that actually goes and likes all of those Matrix movies and the Pirates of the Caribbean ones, but we won't get into that right now. All right, so let's go ahead and let's get into the show.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
So first of all, just a quick little story that I wanted to share on the show this week. And I have seen The Last Jedi 9 times in the theater. I have Movie Pass. Saw The Force Awakens 12 times, I believe, in the theater, if I'm not mistaken. And after the 9th viewing, I wasn't 100% sure if I was going to go see it in the theater again. I was kicking it around, but just hadn't really decided on anything. NASCAR season is starting up, so I've got this portion of my brain now is being occupied by, race cars going really fast in circles, and so, which is great. And, this is my 3 pop culture loves, or my 3 things beyond God and my family and my job that I love: Star Wars, Depeche Mode, and NASCAR. It's a rarity when all 3 are happening at the same time, but they're about to happen at the same time because we've got Star Wars movies coming out. Depeche Mode's announced some new North American dates, and I might be going in June, and NASCAR season is getting underway. So, needless to say, my time is a bit divided, which is why I hadn't decided whether or not I was going to go see The Last Jedi again. But I happened to be doing there's a theater, the closest theater to my house, and I went and looked online because I got family coming to town to see what was playing and whether or not we wanted to go to the movies or not. And I happened to notice that this past Friday, the 9th, was the last day that this theater here in Andover, near where I live, was the last day they were going to be showing The Last Jedi. And it was actually my wife, Melinda, who was like, well, you got to go. You going to go? And I was like, yeah, it was a Friday. It was after work, and I wasn't 100% sure. And I was like, yeah, you know what? I will. My attention had been on NASCAR, but I always got time, for Star Wars, and, we'll go see it at least one more time in the theater. The AMC near me is still playing it, but I don't think I'm going to be able to get back there with the family coming to town before it leaves there. So I'm like, all right, I'll go to this is kind of cool. I'll go to the last showing at the closest theater to my house. And it was me and a younger couple behind me, and then a guy probably my age that came in. So it was just the 4 of us, spaced throughout the theater. And it was clear that the 3 other people in the theater with me hadn't seen the movie. And it was just such another great experience. Sure, I'm by myself, and I go to the movies alone a lot. I did when I was single. I do when I'm married. It's the nature of having kids and all that. But oftentimes it's more fun to go with somebody. But I was by myself, which is fine. And but I felt like that this was another great. Well, I don't feel like I know. It was another great experience, knowing what was going to happen in the movie and paying attention to the amazing sights and sounds on the screen, enjoying my Reylo moments, and hearing this guy and this couple laughing at all the moments in the movie that are funny, gasping at all the moments in the movie when they were shocked. Spoiler alert, like when Kylo Ren kills, Snoke. It was, well, when Holdo, hyperdrives into the supremacy, you could hear them audibly gasp. It was cool, man. It was so cool. And I thought about Rian Johnson in the moment. I really, really, really. I mean, I love to interview JJ. I love to interview George Lucas, but I genuinely would love to meet Rian Johnson one day. He's been doing so many of these interviews with people talking about the movie, and there's been some people that have said it's kind of like Rian Johnson's explanation tour, and who knows what the rationale is behind it. Maybe J.J. Abrams had the opportunity to be just as open about The Last Jedi as Rian Johnson did, but he didn't do it, and maybe Rian Johnson is taking advantage of it. It's clear, as I've said, this guy has a passion and love for Star Wars. He tells this story about getting his first video camera, his father buying his first video camera when he was a kid, and setting it up on the floor between the wall and the couch and the camera angle and making it look like it's the trench run. I did the same thing driving on the freeway with my dad, and being in the then carpool lane, and anytime there's two walls to the side of you and you're moving in something, it's the trench run. And to hear him talk about the decision making in this movie and his love for the movie, and how careful he is when people are asking him questions about particular moments. He did this long interview with Collider, with Frosty Weintraub, and they did a Q&A session at the end of this panel, and people were asking motivation of Kylo Ren. Did he know going into the room when he brought Rey there that what he was going to do? And certain things Rian Johnson will be very honest about, like in that moment, he says, Kylo Ren, Ben Solo had this idea. He was taking Snoke out, but he didn't know how he was going to do it, and it wasn't until he got into the moment where he was looking for the right moment, right? Just searching for that key time, and then it arrived. He talked about how during the whole exchange between Snoke and Rey on the Supremacy, and Kylo Ren's just kneeling in the background, everything that Kylo was doing, everything that Adam Driver was doing as an actor was all intentional. They were talking about his motivation, watching Snoke take Rey and pin her up in the air and probing her mind and causing her all that pain, and the look on his face and what he would be thinking. He wasn't just sitting there. He as an actor, he was acting. There's a great clip from the Empire of Dreams DVD, the making of a saga. The Empire of Dreams. It's the documentary, right? With Kenny Baker, and Kenny Baker talks about how when he first got in the R2 unit for Star Wars, he had to kind of he shook it and bounced around, and you watch the movie and you see that in the original all the Star Wars movies. But he said he would smile inside. He would be standing there because he was a little dude, and he would smile and look around. And he said he did that because he knew he had to emote something. And if R2 was giving, shakes and beeps of happiness, he was smiling inside. And of course we can't see it, but it does add something to it. You hear Kenny Baker make that comment. You see R2 in those moments in the movie when he does that, and you can't help but smile thinking about, I can imagine, R2's happy right here. Adam Driver was doing the same thing. So Rian Johnson has made such an incredibly special film. And I'm so glad that I went Friday to experience it again with three people who hadn't seen it yet. Now, who knows if they liked it afterwards? Who knows if they were laughing and maybe enjoying it in the moment, but they walked out of the theater, and when they walked out of the theater, they joined the other individuals out there who can't stand the movie and feel like that it destroyed their childhood. And it's completely possible. I know I am the witness that those three other individuals in there were having a good time because I heard it, and it made for an enjoyable experience with me. So I just wanted to share that with you. I thought it was a cool story, and let me go here. This is another part of the show that I wanted to talk about, but since we're right here in the moment, I'll go ahead and talk about it here. I was listening to, and again, I've been listening to a lot of, I listen to podcasts every week and kind of pull from people's comments, and it sparks my interest, and I end up going down a line of thinking. And somebody made a comment about the movies being important or not important, serious or not serious. And we've got Black Panther coming out in a few weeks, and it's getting great reviews. There are a lot of people talking about what an important film it is. And of course it is, right? How here you have a film for a segment of America now that has a superhero of their own in their own movie, and how fantastic that is, and it's wonderful, right? I've got no problems with diversity. I have a problem with diversity when people are ridiculous in their calls for diversity. I've got a problem with that when diversity goes and trumps all. But not where I'm going right now. My point being is that people have been talking about how important that movie is, Black Panther, and it got me thinking. And it got me thinking about the importance of Star Wars, and specifically the importance of The Last Jedi versus The Force Awakens. And this is on a completely different level, so don't overlap these two things. I was just simply stating, as an example, Black Panther and how socially it's an important movie for very obvious reasons, and that's a good thing. But how, in my opinion, in a much different way, The Last Jedi is also an important movie, and different than The Force Awakens. Because there are serious things discussed in The Last Jedi. And you can say this for most movies and dramas that tackle particular issues. People don't usually go and think about the societal impact of certain messages inside of Star Wars because they're Star Wars movies and they don't get taken seriously. But for me, these emotional journeys that you see these people go on, even if it is in a galaxy far, far away with a mythical force that binds the galaxy together with spaceships, the themes in these movies, and again, more so in The Last Jedi and The Force Awakens, in my opinion, are important. It's important to see those relationships and those dynamics play out on screen. It's important to have young people see these movies and talk about the desire of power and how it corrupts individuals, and how you can still find good in people even though they may seem unredeemable. The importance of relationships and the innocence that is lost going through experiences. And I know I'm going deep. I just feel like for The Last Jedi specifically, that Rian Johnson doesn't get enough credit for what he did in the movie in deciding to challenge all these characters, and why those challenges are important for people to see, and why this makes for just more than, in my opinion, entertaining cinema. Poe being so arrogant and thinking he knew everything throughout the movie, only at the end during that battle on Crate to realize that we've got to make a different decision here. We have to turn away. We're losing too many people. This is not worth it. We'll find a different path. Right? Thinking that Ben Solo is going to come back from Kylo Ren, but yet in the moment he makes a bad decision, and at the end of that movie is he regretting that decision? Luke Skywalker. And the whole story around how he tried to go and do something and create something, and yet evil came back into the mix again and took it away from him. He made a mistake, but certainly that was coming from a place where he was dealing with a difficult situation, and rather than continuing to work through his problems, he decided to go and hide. But you can't run away from those things because they're going to end up finding you eventually, and maybe there's a different path you need to take, and how that path can be big, not just for you, but for the sake of the movie, an entire galaxy. So we discount the importance and the teaching moments of these stories in these movies, and we don't give them enough credit. And I just wanted to take a moment to try to give it some credit, because Rian Johnson took a lot of care to make this movie, and he maybe he wasn't thinking of it as deep as I did. Maybe if he heard my words about this, he would go and realize, and it would mean something to him, that it went beyond what he was hoping for. But to me, these are important movies. And the lessons that Star Wars has brought us on so many levels is incredibly important, especially for me as a childhood, and for me as a child growing up. Now, it's going to be different for a whole generation, especially with the way these movies are being made. And hopefully, the caretakers of this genre will do just as good a job as the predecessors did, right? Especially going back to George Lucas, who started it all. I mean, it's all rooted in what George did with the storytelling and the works of Joseph Campbell. I mean, it all starts there. As long as those that are tasked with creating these news stories continue to carry that on, then hopefully Star Wars will continue to be as special as it is for those future generations and be able to share those messages and those stories, because they are really, really important, even if they are told in a fantasy setting with dudes in masks and lightsabers. All right, so there's my rant, and I can think of no better way to get to the next portion of the show.
Let the past die. Kill it. If you have to. That's the only way to become what you were meant to be.
So J.J. Abrams was in the middle of an interview, and at the end of the interview, somebody had asked him, "Hey, so can you tell us anything about Episode 9?" And he made a comment, and basically, well, let me go ahead and pull it up here. I've got it. It'll take me 2 seconds. Here we go. Abrams was asked about Episode 9, and he says, I'm actually going to be leaving this room and going right there. That's to Lucasfilm. I can't wait for you to see what we're doing. JJ has also been on record after he took over for Colin Trevorrow of saying that he was hoping to really, really do something different with Episode 9. And I don't want to retread over what we've talked about in previous shows, but had to go backwards to go forwards in The Force Awakens. Well, all of our characters have been through their trials. They've moved on, even though they're in the same place. We've got a group of people now and a galaxy that needs to be sorted out, and J.J. Abrams is going to be the person that's tasked with doing that. And I can think of no better person to go and cap it off, especially after what Rian Johnson did. Something popped into my head when I played the intro to the show this week, and I'll go ahead and play it again, and I'll stop it, and I'll tell you I'll point out what it is that I was thinking about after I heard this.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who knows if J.J. Abrams is going to go there or not, right? I have no way of knowing. We'll know at the end of next year. But when the intro played and that clip of Kylo Ren from The Force Awakens played, and we know in the movie he's speaking to Darth Vader's helmet, and he says, nothing will stand in our way, I will finish what you started. I just thought, wow, it'd be interesting if, and maybe we're still in the middle of him figuring that out, but it'd be interesting if that line of thinking continues. It'd be interesting if it turns out that Kylo Ren hasn't been vocal yet as to what he thinks that he's trying to finish of what his grandfather started. Is it ruling the galaxy? Is there something more specific than that? What does he think it was that his grandfather wanted to do? I mean, I know we all have our ideas in the general sense of what Darth Vader was doing with the Empire and ruling the galaxy, but Kylo Ren's motivations, at least in my opinion, have been somewhat questionable. And now that he's taken out Snoke, now that he's tried to bring Rey to his side in his desire to burn everything from the past, what is his motivation going to be moving forward. Now, at the end of the Last Jedi, he is vocal about what's going to happen. I'm going to destroy her, and then I'm going to destroy you. It'll be the last of the Jedi, and Luke does the whole everything you just said was wrong. As a matter of fact, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I actually have that audio.
Every word of what you just said was wrong. The rebellion is reborn today. The war is just beginning. And I will not be the Last Jedi.
So if it was truly Kylo Ren's desire now to wipe out the Last Jedi, and depending on how far we skip forward in the timeline, if we do at all, how much of Episode 9 is going to be now the rebellion is formed fighting back against the resistance, and how much is it going to be that now Kylo Ren is hell-bent on going and destroying everything that he feels like betrayed him, and that includes Rey, and that includes whoever she's training. The biggest question that I have, I guess the first question that I have, if I could have one question answered about Episode 9, what would it be? For me, it would be, where are we going to start in the timeline? Because watching The Last Jedi again, I was thinking, wow, we've got it would be really kind of unique if we did just kind of pick up where we left off for Episode 9 and maybe do a time jump in the middle of the movie. I think it's going to be rather weird if we're a year or two down the line, considering that there's going to be a whole lot that would have happened in that gap, right? I guess the assumption, at least in my mind, is that they go to those parts of the galaxy where the signal was sent, and Luke Skywalker's story is now spreading throughout the galaxy, and people are now going to go ahead and rise up and join the rebellion to fight against the First Order. The motivation of these characters, though, I'm just so fascinated. I mean, it's an understatement to see how this is going to play out. One more quick comment, going back to Rian Johnson real quick. In that same panel that Rian Johnson had with Collider, he was asked about if Kylo Ren was regretting what he was thinking or what he did in the moment right at the end when there's that last little force shipping moment between him and Rey before she closes the Falcon door on him, and he has his dad's dice in his hands before they disappear. She asked Rian Johnson, hey, is Kylo Ren regretting his decisions? And Rian Johnson didn't answer it. He says, look, I'd rather, the movie's yours now, going to the audience, it's our movie now. He's like, and that's something that I'd rather have you come to your own conclusion on and make your own decision about what you think Kylo Ren was thinking in this moment. But I couldn't disagree more with individuals who say the story's got nowhere to go. It's got everywhere to go. And these characters now are even better, in my opinion, than when we first met them, having gone through what they've gone through, and with the knowledge that they have. Even though it really is a arguably incredibly short period of time between the beginning of the in real time, between the beginning of The Force Awakens and then the end of The Last Jedi. But what Rian Johnson did in molding these characters and crafting them and putting them in a different place, emotionally speaking, and again, bringing J.J. Abrams in to cap this whole thing off, being the guy that started it, it cannot get here fast enough.
Fulfill your destiny.
All right, so let's go to the other big news this week. Title of the podcast is Always in Motion is the Future. This dropped earlier in the week. Game of Thrones creators David Benioff and D.B. Weiss to write and produce a new series of Star Wars films separate from Rian Johnson's trilogy. I was really excited about this. Still am, to be honest. And I love Game of Thrones. I got into it super late. Didn't watch any of them until last year, and was able to watch this last season as it happened, but basically just binge watched the whole thing with my wife. And I wish it wasn't so colorful. I know that's a lot of what's in George R.R. Martin's books, Some of the more explicit stuff I can do without that. Not that I'm a prude. It's just for my preference. I prefer things toned down. When you have sons, right, of the age that they are, it just makes it easier to watch things that don't have a lot of nudity and profanity in the house, and you can watch them more often. That being said, there's no doubt that these dudes know how to write stories. I disagree with the people, and I've heard a lot of people say that ever since they moved off of the actual source material of George R.R. Martin and started creating their own stories in the TV show, that the storytelling and the writing hasn't been very good. Completely disagree. I still think it's fantastic, and they're the perfect guys to go and create a series of Star Wars movies based off of what they've done with Game of Thrones. And of course, it's going to be Star Wars. It's not going to be Game of Thrones. So people throwing around jokes about things being explicit and language and nudity, and it's not going to be in there, right? People can do more than one thing. The nanosecond that I was going to spend on this, I just want to make a quick point. There was a lot of people that immediately started complaining because, and just as I read it, these were two white dudes that have been hired to go and direct these series of movies. Bob Iger has said that they basically, the double Ds they call them, David and DB, decided to pick a point in the Star Wars timeline and then make a series of stories there. In my opinion, Old Republic seems the most logical, but it could be anywhere. But there were people that were upset immediately just because it was two white dudes. And the calls for diversity and people saying we need a person of color or we need a woman to direct these movies. What are you guys doing? My nanosecond on this is, can we just argue about the content? I tend to believe personally the Star Wars and Lucasfilm and Disney has done a really, really good job of being diverse. You look at the makeup of the story panel. You look at Kathleen Kennedy, who runs everything. They do a great job. And the best people should be hired to create the content. And that's how I've always felt. The best person, man, woman, regardless of color, gender, sexual identity, it doesn't matter. The best person for the job should get hired. The movies themselves, I want them to be rich, and they are, and I want them to be diverse. And I want there to be characters that people of all walks of life can go and relate to. And for the most part, they are. We get so hung up on the people whose names just basically appear on the poster. I just want good storytelling and people to create really, really good content. And if the content comes out and there are issues with the content specifically, then that's worthy of criticism. But people already judging them, saying that, well, I don't like the way they handle women on Game of Thrones. Okay, well, that's Game of Thrones. Why don't you wait to see what they do on Star Wars and see how they handle women in Star Wars? Well, I would like somebody who was different because they could provide a different viewpoint on these things. Okay, well, again, why don't you wait until these movies come out and then go and make a decision on whether or not you think they did a good enough job, or if it ends up meeting what you want. The market is going to decide, right? The viewers and the consumers of this content are ultimately going to be the ones to decide whether or not Disney and Lucasfilm are doing a good job. So let it go and play out. But the people who are in charge, I personally believe they're doing a fine job in making sure that all voices are heard and represented. And it was just so disappointing in the fandom to see people immediately being so toxic. Everybody's entitled to their opinion, right? That's fine. And you can put it out there, and you've got all kinds of different ways to put it out there. But I also am entitled to my opinion, and I think a lot of people are being really irrational and ridiculous. And it's toxic to the fandom, and it bums me out when I see it. And it makes me wish I was one of those individuals, if it's like you, who wasn't on the Reddit and wasn't on Facebook and wasn't on Twitter. But unfortunately, I am. So I end up seeing all of it, and then I go and I get annoyed. Somebody made a comment. And I think it was FJ DeSanto on Rebel Force Radio this week. He's like, could you imagine what would have happened if Twitter or Facebook or whatever was around? We were all talking the way that we were when the Phantom Menace came out. I can't even. I'm a firm believer that everything happens for a reason, and I can't even. I can't even fathom what the reaction of the fandom would have been like when the Phantom Menace came out. And as FJ said, it's like, would we even have any other movies any other Star Wars movies to have to deal with that kind of backlash. It's frustrating. It's frustrating and it's toxic and it's not good for the fandom. One of the other shows that I really, really enjoy, and this week's was really, really great, was Brews and Blasters. Those guys, they deviate a lot, which is fine because they're just fun dudes from Boston that are really fun to listen to. But man, I'll tell you what, I listened to a bunch of commentary about Solo: A Star Wars Story, and all kinds of people having all kinds of problems with, he doesn't look like Han Solo, he doesn't talk like Han Solo, he's not like Han Solo, right? And you listen to the dudes on Brews and Blasters, man, and they were like two little kids so excited. They didn't care. And it was so refreshing, and it was so great to hear, and it actually made me question even some of my thoughts about it. Just life is too damn short to get too hung up on the petty nonsense and the agenda nonsense, and those two dudes just going, man, it looked great, it looked cool, there's a train, and the dude fighting on the train, he looked all tribal, and Kira and Emilia Clarke, and Han Solo, and they was acting like Solo. It was so great, it was so positive, and it was exactly what I needed to hear after all the other nonsense that I had been reading. So just a hat tip to Brews and Blasters if you want a really, really fun show to listen to, and just in general, they've got a bunch of just great goofy music on it, and you can just tell these are two guys that get along, love Star Wars, and are just best friends, and just love talking about it. So there's my plug for Brews and Blasters. But look, this is the new world we're in right now when it comes to Star Wars. It's not going to be like it was. It's not going to be a waiting game anymore. We're not going to have to go and wait for years upon years for the next movie to come out. I made the comment the last time that it was the first last time that we were going to have to wait this long again for a Star Wars movie, and that was when right before The Force Awakens came out. That was the last time that we were going to have to wait that long, and now we're experiencing 2 movies in the span of 6 months, and this is the new reality. And for guys like me who grew up with these movies and having to wait a long time for them to come out in the anticipation, I think it's amazing that we don't have to wait anymore, that we've got this content and it's there and available at our fingertips. But at the same time, it's also like, wow, it's going to be there right at our fingertips, and how are we not going to implode? I was sitting in my chair the other day looking around at my Star Wars posters and my stuff on the wall and my toys and stuff going, I'm like, I'm not going to be able to keep up. I'm going to have to slow down on my purchasing now moving forward and just buy like select key things that I want, because we have so many movies coming out. It's like there's not enough money in the world, and I'm not going to be around long enough to enjoy all this stuff that I got. My family is visiting, by the way, my dad and my stepmom for this weekend, the Daytona 500s this weekend. And they're going to be staying in my room/office because I keep weird hours, so I have my own room at the bottom floor of the house, and it's basically just a room of collectibles, right? They're going to laugh. It's ridiculous. It's like if you were ever to book a room in the Star Wars suite, it would be the one that I'm in right now. I can't wait for them to see where they're going to be sleeping here while they stay. All right, we got a few minutes left. Let's go ahead and we'll talk a little Solo, a Star Wars story.
So you want to make a difference?
Yeah.
Trust me, you're gonna love it. And which branch are you interested in joining?
I'm gonna be a pilot. Best in the galaxy.
I've been running scams on the street since I was 10. I was kicked out of the flight academy for having a mind of my own.
Hey, kid. I'm putting together a crew. You in?
That's yes.
I might be the only person. Who knows what you really are?
What's that?
You know, it's an interesting moment right there in the in the spot when she makes that comment, and I hadn't really picked up on it before, but the knows who you really are, that could mean any number of things in that moment. Like if Han Solo is pretending to be somebody else, right? So and it looks like in that scene she's dressed to the nines and talking to him, and so maybe he's hiding who his identity is. I just thought it was cool. Something I hadn't really thought about in the trailer. And I love the music, by the way. There's a YouTube clip out, and I almost grabbed it, but I've gotten nailed for copyright for playing the songs too long on the podcast recently, so I didn't want to have that happen again. There's a YouTube clip out there, though, that has just the music of the trailer, and then the music is just absolutely fantastic. But the one thing I wanted to mention about the trailer, and again, that you were listening to the supercut there, that was both trailers combined. Somebody did just a fantastic job of putting both of them together, and normally I don't like those. Normally I prefer to have sort of the pure version that Disney and Lucasfilm put out, but this one did such a great job that it's the one I've been watching. But somebody made a comment about how this was essentially a Western in space. And I guess I kind of picked up on that, but it hadn't really dawned on me. And Kathleen Kennedy had made some comments a while back talking about that very thing, that this was essentially going to be a Western. And when you go back with that mindset and you look at some of the imagery and some of the shots, there's one shot that's lifted directly from Silverado, which Lawrence Kasdan wrote, where Han Solo's standing there and he's going to face off, and it's got the hip shot, and he undoes the snap on his blaster holster. So keeping that in mind, you go back and watch the trailer and look at some of the imagery and the teaser posters that came out, and it really is giving off this Western vibe. And that's really, really good, specifically when it comes to, depending on what Star Wars does with future movies, if they're going the Marvel route where these films are going to zero in specifically on certain types of genres. Lucas toyed with this a bit. When you go back and watch Attack of the Clones, it is kind of like a mystery. A little noir, but not. But he did say specifically he wanted it to be kind of a detective mystery, especially the storyline with Obi-Wan Kenobi. You go and look at a movie like Winter Soldier. I mean, that's a spy film. So if they're going this route specifically for Solo, and it's something they plan on doing down the line, then I think it's the right move. I do question, though, and we're just about out of time for this week's show, so I'll wrap up on this. I do question with the hiring of the guys from Game of Thrones to make a series of movies, and with Rian Johnson's film, whether or not we're going to see many standalone movies. I mean, series is not a trilogy. We know Rian Johnson is writing a trilogy, so it's a little tough to speculate without knowing the timeline, because you're talking about, I mean, spans of years and years and years of movies, and how are these going to mix? You know, with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, with the MCU, it's a little different. It's easier. You've got your core Avengers movies, but then you have sort of your spin-off singular films, but they all fit and work together. We don't quite have that dynamic yet, and if we've got a series being done by the Game of Thrones guys and a separate trilogy, how are they going to end up tying all those together? I know that as a fan, I'm totally fine with waiting and finding out. I just wonder, am I going to be around long enough to watch all these movies of what's announced and what haven't they announced yet? I do believe we're going to be going to 2 movies a year. I think that's an inevitability. I think we're going to be heading towards 2 Star Wars movies a year. What that means, I don't really know yet. What that means for, spin-off movies, Star Wars stories, who knows? All I know is we're getting a Han Solo movie in a few months, and then we have Episode 9 at the end of next year, and then these other movies that are being made by individuals who I'm already a huge fan of, so you know what? I'm cool with all of it. And that's it. Thank you so much for checking out the show this week. You can drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com, talkshownerd@gmail.com. As always, follow me wherever you go and listen to this. Drop me a message. Would love to hear from you. I hope you have yourself a fantastic week. We'll be back next week. Have no idea what we'll be talking about. except to say that it'll be about Star Wars. So, Podbean, Spreaker, Stitcher, YouTube, iTunes. I think that's it. Yeah, that's it. All right. Thanks so much for listening. As always, I hope that you enjoyed listening to it as much as I did recording it. And until next